Ladies and gents, we are here today with a special guest. This is Marc Goone from Hungry Horse Poker, and I'm devastated to learn today that his actual name is not the Hungry Horse, like I've been thinking of him as. Welcome to the channel, Marc.
Someone offered me actually a lot of money to change my name to Hungry Horse. And by a lot of money, I mean they offered to pay for the name change.
I think you should do it. The alliteration is strong, and it would make me happy because you are the Hungry Horse in my mind and always will be.
You know, my wife just got used to having the last name Goone, so if it changed to Horse, I don't know how she would go for that.
Level up, level down? Let us know in the comments. I'm learning this YouTube game. So we are here today because although we have a lot of dissimilarities, Marc, you are mainly geared towards live poker, and I'm geared towards online, but we have a lot in common as well, which is that we talk about cash game poker, and we're both proponents of this anti-copying GTO movement, the idea that the best true EV line, as I would call it, maybe you would just say the best line, is the result of exploiting and your opponent's range and hand reading and stuff like that. And so that's why you're here today. You have brought to us 5 spots where you think theory does not matter, and you're going to show them to the Carrot Corner audience. Is that right?
Correct. And to be clear, these are spots where I think theory at equilibrium doesn't matter. I always think theory matters because the best exploit player in the world, if you tell it how somebody's playing, is going to be a solver. So a lot of people think like, oh, you're anti-solver, you're anti-GTO. That's not the case at all. I have carpal tunnel from spending so much time in pile solver, but I just think people misapply theory and try to use it at equilibrium against a player. You know, they're looking at a guy in seat 8, Big Jeremy, who's on his 8th beer, and they're thinking, well, am I balanced in this spot? And that's just absolutely insane to me.
Yeah, 8 beers isn't that much for Big Jeremy, though. He needs to get to about 15 before it really starts showing.
Yeah.
You know, I agree. I think the terms theory and GTO are kind of used interchangeably at times, and that's not the case at all. We have a course on poker theory, a very big course, but we wouldn't claim to have a course on GTO because that would be silly. We're not trying to tell people what to do, but how to think. And so, as you say, your theory can be used to fuel your exploits. So these hands are kind of a live format. What would be the setting, the context for these hands? What kind of game, what kind of stakes?
Yeah, so for the first hand, I think this can apply to online or live. I want to show like why this is applicable to any type of poker. So for this first hand, I just want to show like this is a 2.5x button open, and we're playing 100 big blind poker, and we are in the big blind with 10-7 suited. And equilibrium at 100 big blinds deep, this hand is actually supposed to be a polar 3-bet, meaning you can pull up a polar range here. In equilibrium, what we're supposed to be doing is 3-betting a ton of kind of just polar bluffs, meaning we're not going pure linear, right? We have hands like Jack-7 suited, 10-6 suited, 10-7 suited. We don't have like Ace-6 off, Ace-4 off. So we have a ton of just like kind of polar bluffs here. And what I wanted to show is if the only thing we do here is adjust, and we reduce the in-position player having 4 bets by 3%. And we reduce the amount he folds by 3%, which I think even solid online regs are probably not finding enough 4 bets. They're calling just a little bit too much in position. All of a sudden, our range from the big blind just becomes almost pure linear here. And all the kind of 4-bet bluffs get immediately just taken out of our range from the big blind. As you can see here, just pure linear, pure upper left-hand corner, as my business partner Gethin calls it, the hand balloon chart. I don't know why he calls it the hand balloon chart, but this is the hand balloon chart. You see, it's just all the good hands. We no longer have that 10-7 suited in there. So I would just say like against most players, unless you're playing against like a top reg at 1K NL or 2K NL or whatever, like I would just recommend not 3-betting polar from out of position.
Yeah, it's really cool. And like a lot of things, equilibrium is balanced on a knife edge. It's almost purposefully set up by the indifference seeking algorithm such that if you adjust one little thing, the whole pyramid falls apart and now you have a completely different looking chart. That's what people have to bear in mind. There's no secret recipe or formula for playing good poker. It's just, this is the state of equilibrium, and then that's on a knife's edge and it's going to swing very quickly. So we do see a 3-bet here from the player with the 10-7. Is this something you maybe critiqued in the game of a student of yours or something like that?
Yeah, I just think it's not necessary. I would just be going pure linear here. And I'd much rather be 3-betting a hand like Ace-10 suited or Jack-10 suited or Queen-10 suited than a 10-7 suited, because the player in position is most likely going to be slightly over defending and slightly under 4-betting.
Do you think if you just dialed the 4-bet down without dialing the fold percentage down, that this would still be okay? Like if you had a player who just under 4 bets, but is generally, nitty, would this still be an okay 3-bet?
It depends if you dialed the 4 bets down and you turned those 4 bets into calls. All of a sudden, I think you're going to want to start going more linear, because like if they have 3% more calls and 3% less 4 bets, If they're just calling more, that means you're more incentivized to just outhand them kind of post-flop.
Especially out of position where we just need a bit more clout to our hand if we don't have the compensating fold equity. I totally agree, by the way, that people over defend. I think it's so common in like the YouTube game or the streamer game where someone's like, we opened the 8-7 suited on the button. We're of course in the mix here and we're flattening this 3-bet, we have to be in it to win it. And it's like, sure, that makes good content, but the hand is like basically indifferent at equilibrium. And if you call it all the time, you're calling 5% more if you do that with all those mixed hands than the solver is. And then this adjustment is warranted. Awesome point. I think people bypass pre-flop a lot. I'm glad you brought it up. Let's move on to a post-flop spot.
Cool. Let's move on to post-flop.
So we are assuming the role of the fearsome villain 7 in this hand, not hero. There are no heroes in this hand history. So this is another sort of live style hand. Would you recommend a 3x open generally? Are you happy with that for live players?
I'd say in live, you should push it even more, especially if people are just under 3-betting and they're just calling too much. I generally recommend in live poker to open like a tighter, stronger range and just open to bigger sizes because you're just going to be able to realize because people are just massively under 3-betting live.
Yep.
And so we're going to a flop here, and this is point number 2, and this is just range betting on boards that are quote-unquote bad for us. And I would say against strong players, against very, very strong players, this does not apply, but be careful as to who you ascribe the tag of strong player to, because in equilibrium, okay, we're supposed to bet with our range 35% of the time here. But the questions I would ask is, what if the opponent is fast playing too much of their value on this flop and not protecting their calling range? What if the opponent is overfolding to a c-bet? What if the opponent is over-defending with weak marginal hands? Or what if the opponent is under-bluffing when we check back? If 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those things start to be true, then all of a sudden the solver on this flop will just immediately begin range betting. So once again, if the opponent is raising too much strong stuff, fast playing too much, over folding to the c-bet, or over defending with weak marginal stuff, and they are under bluffing, especially for large sizes when we check back the flop, range betting here seems to be pretty good against weak players. And the thing that range betting allows you to do is when they raise off their strong stuff, well, you can just immediately fold. And when they call, well, now they're going to be extremely capped because on these wet dynamic boards, they're just so incentivized to raise off their 2-pair, their sets, their straights right away. So getting to the turn, they just have too much weak stuff. And when you have a hand that is air, not like ace queen, maybe a weaker hand here, you have a hand that is air, you just know that you are bluffing into an extremely capped range, which makes your bluff much more profitable across turns and rivers. And when you do have a hand with some showdown value like ace queen here, you can just check back and oftentimes just bluff catch rivers with ace high because they raise off so much of their strong stuff on the flop. All of a sudden you have an extremely profitable bluff catch across rivers.
I think you guys had a video along these lines. It was like the most profitable call spot in the world or something. I'm probably butchering the title, but I seem to remember like the c-bet, flop, check back turn, call river probe line on certain textures was something you had a video about.
Yeah, against weak players, that line is like overpowered.
Yeah, I think all of these things make a lot of sense. The proper raise strategy here, if you do start betting your whole range, the actual counter from the solver, I believe, is to raise something like 60 to 70% of the time against the range bet if it knows it's coming. So one other way to think about this is if your opponents are so far away from the ideal counter strategy, they must be playing pretty incorrectly against the range bet strategy here. The only thing I might add is I might question whether exactly a hand like ace queen actually performs best as a check, and then we just want to build a very air heavy c-bet range here, and whether there might still be utility in checking back with exactly the ace queen of clubs here. And if we do think that they're under probing turn and they're not, capitalizing on how strong their range is on this board, then we can maybe like seek some transparency against certain players, check back, find out for free what they have, go from there. That could be another exploit we could add with certain parts of our range. What do you think?
Yeah, in general, I'm a big fan of like simplifying because I'm kind of a dummy and my brain just can't grasp a complex strategy executed perfectly is always going to outperform a simple strategy, but a simple strategy usually is going to be much more easy to execute well than a complex strategy where you start splitting your range and checking some hands or betting some hands. And one of the things I like to reference is what we do at Hungry Horse, like on our first and last day of boot camp, is we have, the players who take our boot camp are going to be players who are all winning players, at least at minimum at 2-5 live. So these are all people who are winning, they're trying, they are the best players in their pool, and we have them play against the solver in a 3-bet pot. And the solver unilaterally, every single time, the solver either range bets or range checks against them. The solver does not mix. So I like to think like if the solver is not mixing against good players, maybe I shouldn't be mixing either. And maybe I should just try to execute a strategy. Like, where are they going to make the most mistakes? If they make the most mistakes when I check back, then I should be checking back my range. If they make the most mistakes when I c-bet, then I should just be c-betting my entire range. And I like to think of it in that way instead of trying to play a more complex strategy where we check some and c-bet some.
Yeah, cool. I accept that that's a decent way to go, especially when you're putting people through a uniform boot camp where you're teaching the same lessons to a group and then there's cycles of class that come and go. I would maybe say that we differ a little bit in that I would say, depending on what your hand is, the answer to what they play worst against, what line they play worst against, might actually depend heavily on what your cards are. So it might not be as simple as just saying whatever, do they play worse against check or do they play worse against bet? You could say you had a maniac that's probing the turn all the time, for example. You could say that they play worse against check when you have a hand that can call turn, and they play well against check when you have a hand that can't call turn. And then I think that's where you want to get more into hand by hand sort of exploits. But as a general approach, yeah, I think that's very reasonable, especially for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, for sure.
So we do c-bet and we're called here. The turn is the 5 of diamonds. Are these real hand histories that are
No,
played?
It's just I just wanted to show the example on the flop so
Sure.
we can just skip the rest of the hand.
Sure, no worries. They're going to be absolutely raging. Comment sections what happened in this hand? You will never, ever know, guys. Okay, next hand. What's going on here?
All right, so the third spot where I believe theory doesn't matter is small bets in position on the river. So let's kind of walk through this hand here in that the cutoff opens. We 3-bet on the button here. Flop comes queen 9-3. He checks it over. We c-bet 1/3. He calls. Turn is a blank. We continue here for a large size, and they call once again. Now we go to a river, which pairs the bottom card here, and they check. So in equilibrium, there are no small bets in position on the river, and the reason for that is because essentially you just open the action up, you open yourself up to being bluffed, and so even when you're going thin on rivers, you generally just use kind of bigger than half pot sizes in theory in equilibrium on rivers. But I wanted to talk about the small bet in position on rivers and why it can apply against certain type of players. If a player is passive and they are going to underbluff and just call too much, which is going to be your typical weak player, then a small size for thin value here can actually be really, really good. And they're just never going to blow you off your equity. And you're essentially just going to force them to do exactly what you want them to do when they have a hand like 9x or pocket tens or something like that here, that is just never going to fold if you bet 1/3 pot in position. Now, if you are against a player who's just going to spaz and just going to raise a ton whenever they see this small size in position on the river, they're super, super aggro. They're going to start turning 9x into a bluff here. They're going to start turning basically everything into a bluff here. Then against those type of players, sometimes using this small size with thick value here on the river to induce with overpairs with ace queen plus on this river and just calling off. And the point is, in general, that the small size, I think, has its place on the river. People don't study how to respond to this small size. Even good players just don't know how much they should be defending, how much they should be raising. And I think against both weak players and against pretty competent players, the small size on the river does have its place.
Yeah, I think it can also have its place as a bluff because some of the data from Grade E of the Carrot Poker School is that big, big, small is actually one of the most overfolded lines ever. It's really, really underbluffed actually. If the pool ever does that to you, they go big, big, and then small, their bluff frequency is even lower than what the bluff to value ratio is meant to be for those pot odds. But when we actually see people react to that sizing, they're folding a lot more than they should be to should be being in inverted commas there to hit MDF. So yeah, a lot of cool exploitative stuff going on here. I do think that these are some of the rules that solvers give us that are, once we understand why the solver plays in a certain way, we can see the conditions that would have to be true for that to just fall apart entirely, logically. And yeah, as you say, if they're just playing straightforwardly, we think they've got enough equity to value bet small but not big, we want to do this. The other cool point here is that you're actually investing a similar amount of money to a solver in this hand because your flop strategy is very similar. On the turn, you're betting way bigger than what solver would bet with Queen Jack. Solver would see this as a lower investment ceiling by the end of the hand. It would either check the turn, which would do often, and then it would bet really big on the river, having checked the turn, maybe even an overbet when check to, or a big, big bet when check to on the river there. It's the green light. Or it would bet the turn smaller and then probably check back on the river, or maybe bet the turn smaller and then bet the river, or something like half pot. So I think the amount of money that you and the solver are recommending putting in here might be quite similar. You're just kind of doing it in different ways, and you're kind of debunking the solver's idea that certain things are just taboo or no by saying what they're actually based upon, which is a great way of making sense of GTO. I can tell you've spent a lot of time not just in a solver, but also tweaking and node locking and seeing what changes when you change parameters, which is a cool thing to do if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about the big, small line as a bluff. I think that's really, really effective against weaker players who are very much addicted to just like fast playing their value because they don't want a bad beat. And a lot of those players also are just like very, very sticky, even to big bets on turns with their draws. So they're just never folding a hand like Jack 10 on the turn or like King 10 of clubs or 9x of clubs on the turn. And if you get to this river with just complete air with Jack high or 10 high or something like that, well, now all of a sudden you have a very profitable bluff spot to just get them to fold like their King Jack and Jack 10 and King 10 and stuff like that on the river, where you can just go big, small. I mean, if you think the player's never folding a queen, well, all of a sudden you just have a print bluff, like you said, by going big, small here.
Yeah, it's kind of like the nitwit meme in a way, where like when you have a total beginner, they look at the pot odds and they might be like, man, this is like a tiny river bet, I have to call it because it's not very much money and I don't want to fold and I really want the pot. And then when you get someone who's a bit of a try hard but doesn't really have the skills yet, they might ignore pot odds entirely, try and hand read you to death and say something like, oh, this is a milking bet, like villain isn't actually bluffing me here. And then not only are they folding misdraws, but they're folding like 9x and they're folding queen 10 and stuff like this as well. And then when you get the good player again, they're just kind of like, right, do I know enough here to actually fold at 5-1 or 4-1 or whatever? No, and then they're back in call territory again. So it's kind of funny how we have that curve, and the people in the middle are often the ones who actually fold the most to these really small bets here.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
cool.
was example number 3.
All right, let's move on. All right, next hand, take it away.
All right, so this is protecting our check range out of position on the river. So in this one, button opens, we 3-bet in the small blind with queen 9 of hearts. He calls, flop is queen 9 deuce. We c-bet. Button calls, turn is a blank, we continue, button calls, and river is another blank here. And on this river, the solver pure checks top 2 pair here from out of position. And the thing I want to talk about, if our opponent under bluffs even by a small percentage on the river, we're no longer incentivized to protect our checking range from out of position here. Like, they're supposed to bluff pure with all of the Jack 10 that gets here, all of the King 10 of spades, the King Jack, the 10-8 of spades, Ace 3, Ace 5, Ace 6 of spades. And if they just start checking back any of those combos here on the river, we're just super incentivized to just bet ourselves with our value hand because they're just not bluffing enough when we check to them. Now, a lot of people may be thinking, okay, so maybe they're under bluffing, but what if they're also over folding? Well, in that particular scenario, we're just incentivized to size down then. We don't have to always just go all in here, and we can size down. The adjustment here isn't to check if they're overfolding, it's to use smaller sizes.
Yeah, trying to find the sizing they overfold to the least, I guess, is what we're trying to do. So just to put this into a theory lens, like the reason button has to actually bluff everything here is a theoretical concept we talk about in grade 2 of the CPS of the Carrot Poker School, and that concept is called... It's not true, Evie. It's river blunder theorem. It's called river blunder theorem. And it's the idea that once you have filtered by calling and you have shed air from your range, and there's a polarized guy that just went bet check or bet check or bet check, you have a huge equity advantage range versus range, and the fold equity is therefore way above the break-even point. So it's very profitable in theory for button to bet Jack 10 here. And I take your point, a lot of recreational players have no idea about river blunder theorem. They have no concept that this is even the case. And this is something we talked about in your own channel, or at least we will in the future in about half an hour from now. This is one of my theory points that do matter for people, and they don't know that. They end up checking back Jack high, and then it's like, well, that's the only reason check was okay, was that you were meant to get all that EV from hands that invest by betting but not by calling. If that's not happening, I ask my students to think about it in terms of compartments, like which compartments does villain have and how do you extract from each of them. Well, if the compartment that you extract from by checking isn't actually investing if you check, you should start to target. We have a big deal about this in this channel, Mark, where people think I hate target and it becomes a stupid game. But yeah, we end up prioritizing value against the calling region rather than the bluffing region. Call that targeting. If you want, I would just say playing against what villain's range is shifted towards and where you're...
So you're a big fan of when people say things like, I put you on queen 9 of hearts.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely love it. It's what it's all about. Hand reading, quite literally, not range reading. I've always thought hand reading should be called range reading.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, so that's number 4.
All right, so we did bet We made the villain fold. This is a made-up hand. It doesn't matter, guys. It's a made-up hand. Stop caring about the results. It's not even real. Okay, let's move on. Hand number 5. Lesson number 5. Spot number 5, where theory doesn't matter.
Giving up with quote-unquote bad blockers on the river. So this is going to be cutoff opens. We 3-bet on the button, and cutoff is going to call. Flop comes Jack 9 deuce, spade spade club. A lot of people say this is one of the best flops in all of poker, the Jack 9 deuce with 2 spades and a club. I don't know if you've heard that before, but it is maybe the best flop in all of poker. So
I agree.
Cutoff checks, we see bet, he calls. Turn is a blank, he checks, we bet, he calls. And river is a blank, and he checks again. Now, I want to talk about giving up with bad blockers on the river and why in a lot of spots, particularly against players who are not super strong players, it may not matter. Now, in theory, they're supposed to get to this river with a ton of pocket jacks, some pocket nines, and some jack 9 suited. If they raise off too much of their strong stuff on the flop and call with too much of their weak stuff, which I'd say almost every try-hard recreational player, even bad regs, are doing, what that means is getting to the river is they just don't have a very strong range. Now, getting to this river, we've already eliminated that they're probably not going to have jacks, nines, or jack 9 suited as much as they should. If they're supposed to call 9x on this river when we jam 25% of the time, if they overfold just slightly, or they're supposed to call top pair on this river, they're supposed to call with jack x 95% of the time on this river. If they ever fold jack 10 here, or they ever fold queen jack here on this river, even though queen 10 of spades won't win as much money as hands that are blocking their calls and unblocking their folds, hands like ace 3 of clubs or king 10 of diamonds or something like that. Going all in with queen 10 of spades here against people that just don't get to the river with a strong enough range is still outperforming giving up. Now, it's not going to perform as well as a hand like king 10 of diamonds going all in, but it's still going to outperform the EV of just checking back and giving up. Now, in theory, in equilibrium, jamming on this river is losing money. But if you start to just make a few assumptions, it can very quickly become positive EV. And that's why I get so frustrated when people say, well, you know, I just have a bad hand to bluff, without even taking that extra step to think, well, is my opponent calling enough? Does my opponent have more of a capped range than I think? Without even asking those additional questions, which I think are super, super important.
Yeah, I call this the better bluffs fallacy, where the student will be like, we have better hands to bluff. I'd rather have. It's like, yeah, well, you know, I would rather have some coffee still in this cup because I want more cup. I don't. That doesn't mean I'm not going to drink the water that's beside me because I'm thirsty. I'm still going to drink the water regardless of whether there's coffee in the cup. I'm not going to be like, I'm not drinking that water because I'd rather have coffee. Like, it's nonsense. This is what people do. Instead of comparing the EV of the two choices on the table, which are bluff or don't bluff, they compare a real situation to a situation that isn't actually happening. And that to me can never tell you what to do in the real situation. It can't tell you what's highest EV. It can tell you how to build this, I'd call it main character syndrome, this self-obsessed, inward, myopic view of your own strategy where all you care about is constructing your own range and placing this block here and this block there, as if to say that that's somehow going to magically, causally give you all the EV on the planet. It's not. The other thing I would just add here is, yeah, this hand is especially bad in GTO because it doesn't even block the suited jack. But then as you pointed out, one fold of like a Jack 10 combo or King Jack combo or something like that because they just put you on an overpair, because people do that, right? Especially live when you triple barrel them any 3-bet pot. They put you on kings, they fold their jack face up and they say nice hand, and that's a great fold that they just made against pool. Globally, it's a bad fold against the hungry horse and students, but they don't know who they're dealing with, right? You are now the hungry horse again, I've decided. So this is a great example.
I hear people say this type of stuff all the time. Like, I 3x potted a river against a friendly European pro, and he goes, oh, that's too greedy. If you just would have bet pot, I would have called. I think, yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, people like to make big assumptions. They've got their own game down, and it might even be that that European pro's playing well against the average reg, but, you know, that's why we need to be the wolf in sheep's clothing. That's why we always want to be a step ahead. So I think this is a wonderful example of, like, my rule, which is, like, when they need to call all top pair, it will be overfolded. And when they need to start folding over pair, top pair, two pair a lot, it'll probably be underfolded. Humans are instinctive beasts, you know, we are drawn to absolute hand strength whether we like it or not, and when game theory calls for us to fold a bunch of good hands, we don't manage it and we're sticky. And when game theory tells us to call down a 9 or second pair a lot or never fold top pair, we overfold because we are just, you know, like that. We're instinctive.
And not only do they need to call top pair here all the time, they also need to call 9x like a quarter of the time, which I don't think happens at all. And the other thing is like, if you just have them fast play a little bit too much of their pocket jacks and pocket nines, well, now they probably have to call 9x on this river. I don't know, I'm just pulling a number out of my ass, but probably 35 to 40% of the time because they just don't have any sets or two pairs here. So they need to find those calls from somewhere else. So I would just imagine this river is massively overfolded by population.
Yep. Absolutely, and the data would back up another. I keep giving away all the grade E secrets for free, but yeah, late position 3-bet pots especially, where there is just this plethora of like under pair in range and stuff like that, or like draws that messes more suited cards as more pocket pair. There's just going to be like so much overfolding. I have this rule that when queens isn't in range on a low board, there's a lot of overfolding, right? So when you're in late position and queens 4-bets off, as you like to say, or raises off pre, it's even harder, right? You don't even have hands like that bulking out the range. I think this is my favorite one of the examples that you gave. We're at the end of the video, so I'd like to give you the floor. What should people know about you? What should people know about Hungry Horse Poker? Anything you want to plug or tell the Carrot Corner audience about?
Yeah, if you play live poker, if you want to be the best player in your pool, that's what we specialize in. Helping people go from 2-5 to 5-10 to 10-20 and having win rates that most people would believe are unattainable. I'm starting a series on Hungry Horse where I actually play low stakes. I'm playing 5-5, and I'm attempting to win $100 or 20 big blinds per hour, which sounds insane to people who play online poker. But in live poker, it is possible, and I am attempting to prove it on our channel starting this week. So if you'd like to check out the series, if you'd like to win 15, 20 plus big blinds an hour playing live poker, check us out at Hungry Horse.
Yep, and all you've got to do is find a way to tolerate not doing stuff for a lot of the time. What would you say to my online people who are watching this being like, but I like 4-tabling fast fold. What am I going to do between hands? What do you say to your students to keep them focused?
It depends how much you like money, because the ceilings are much higher and the bar is much lower in live poker. It's much easier to win. I mean, you'd be surprised just the relative level of skill difference. Like you could be playing a 5-10-20 game and you won't even have one reg who's as strong as a 200 NL game online.
Yep, I totally agree. I think if my life was different, you know, if I wasn't the Carrot Corner guy, I could see an alternate universe where I went down a live poker path when I was younger if I didn't have like the family and the house and all of that. Because man, yeah, the opportunity is there. If you can stomach live poker, then games are good. Games are still good, and live poker's on the up. You know, you can't really say the same thing about online at the moment. But I'm going to stop unselling like my whole brand right now and just say thank you to you for coming on the channel. It was really nice to get to chat technical stuff. We've chatted a couple of times, but yeah, this was fun. I'd love to do it again on a semi-regular basis at some point in the future. And yeah, we're going to hop on over to Marc's channel now, where I am actually going to be bringing his audience and some of you guys, if you want to come over to Hungry Horse and watch, going to be bringing you a video about the 5 spots where theory doesn't matter. No, wait, we just did that. Where theory does matter. That's what we're going to be doing. So I'll see you there.
Cool. Thanks, Pete.